Once again, welcome to the session hosted by the Contemplative Consciousness Network. The theme for this meeting, which for some of us would be in the morning, in the afternoon, maybe in the middle of the night or in the evening. The theme for this meeting is enjoyable emotions as seen through the lens of CEB, or Cultivating Emotional Balance. And we will talk about CEB and what that approach includes. We will talk about enjoyable emotions and different ways of working with them. But before that, in the tradition of our teachers, both secular and those who come from different contemplative traditions, we will perform a little preliminary meditation, which will be mostly on the themes of establishing a profound sense of ease and then connecting to our positive motivation for this session. And to perform that meditation, I would invite all of us to find a comfortable stationary position. It's perfectly fine to be doing this meditation while lying flat on our back in the supine position, but most likely, most of us would be instead opting for the upright position in which we're sitting comfortably. It's also perfectly fine to find something unique that is uniquely suitable for our own body with its needs and limitations. But whichever position we eventually adopt, the first thing to do is to play around with it a little bit, checking to see how to make it more comfortable, more stable, more relaxed. And then spending some moments on bringing our awareness down into the depths of the body to connect with the sensations arising at the level of our body being in contact with the ground. Noticing those areas, the areas where the body is being held by the earth element. And spending some time in observation, observing the tactile sensations there. And then initiating the process of establishing ease by releasing muscle tension. Spending some time with our feet and toes, relaxing them deeply, noticing the sensations there. Then exploring our legs in general, all the way up to our hips. Spending some time with our pelvic floor. And then transitioning into our abdominal area. The abdomen, the lower back, noticing the sensations, releasing tension, just resting there. Then coming up to our chest, to our shoulders, exploring our upper arms, the elbow, then the forearms. And then our hands and fingers. And then coming back to our shoulders. Exploring the sensations in the back of our head. In our crown. And in our face. And then resting with the totality of our tactile sensations, observing the entire field for some time. This is done to help us ground our attention in the immediacy of the present moment, but also in this vitally important field of our personal experience, strongly connected to our emotional energy and our emotional experiences. And so noticing the process of natural breathing as it manifests in the form of different tactile sensations. And then with that as the foundation for everything else that we're going to be doing today, we can spend some time reflecting on our appreciation or gratitude for this specific moment. And that can be our appreciation for taking the time to explore these wonderful and important topics. So we can appreciate our own motivation, we can appreciate our own willingness, effort, our propensities. But then we can also include our appreciation of others, all the other participants joining this discussion in real time or by means of a recording later. All the other people in this world interested in this material, in these topics, and the cultivation of emotional balance and emotional intelligence. And then beyond that, thinking of all the people who have contributed to this entire field by means of doing research, by means of transmitting practical skills that can be used to strengthen specific emotional patterns. Thinking of the great contemplatives, but also researchers, scientists, and simply people committed to this idea of emotional balance. And resting in this awareness with a sense of genuine appreciation. And then channeling that appreciation into a clear intention for the session. Revisiting our own aspirations related to this material, just bringing them to mind and thinking, what is it that brought me here tonight, today, this morning? What am I trying to achieve by participating in the class or watching the recording? And so performing an act that is known as cognitive exercise or cognitive training, in which we're trying to bring clarity to the domain of our desires and aspirations, our conation. And then with this intention, which will be strongly affecting the rest of this class for each one of us, we briefly bring our awareness back to the body to notice the sensations, the tactile and physical experiences arising in the here and now. And then we introduce a tiny bit of movement to the domain of the body, rocking back and forth, moving our fingers, moving our toes, perhaps smiling to activate the facial muscles. And then slowly concluding the practice as we return to this shared online space. Thank you. And once again, this idea of a shared online space is not completely random, even though we are joining this class by means of live transmission or Zoom kind of meeting, or maybe participating in it by means of a recording. We are still connected to a number of people who are equally interested in the ideas of emotional balance, emotional resilience, emotional intelligence, basically in the qualities of clarity, stability, love, compassion, generosity, and so forth, and different things that are truly at the core of who we are as beings, as species, and certainly as a community or as multiple communities of practice. And so that commitment is to be celebrated by thinking that we are quite literally in a network of people who are committed to contemplative cultivation. Ergo, the name of the Contemplative Consciousness Network. We can imagine ourselves as being a network of that sort, and then derive some inspiration from that will fuel us in this exploration. So throughout this session, I will be occasionally throwing out questions to all of you or to all of us. I will also sometimes try to answer those based on my personal experience. And that exchange, which mostly will be happening by means of the chat function here on Zoom, will help us strengthen this feeling of being in a network, and will strengthen the material itself, because otherwise it's just a bunch of meditations and slides and so forth. And that's not as interactive as we might want it to be. But there are some slides, so I'll just activate them. And before we go on, it's always wonderful to know where you are joining this session from. So while I will describe the overall structure for this meeting, and then when we start going through the actual themes and so forth, all of that will be unpacked. But while I'm doing these preliminary observations, it would be wonderful to know where you are right now physically, if you're comfortable sharing that. And it can be very vague or very specific, but just to share that in the chat if you feel comfortable, along with the mood that you are currently experiencing. And we will talk about the modes a little bit later. Yeah, that will hopefully help us strengthen this feeling of being in a community of practice. And so we have already done the introductory meditation in which we were releasing effort, especially by attending to the physical domain of our experiences, our body. And then we spent some time first generating a sense of appreciation or gratitude, as it can be described. And we will come back to appreciation and gratitude later on. Of course, they form a very important part of the enjoyable emotional family of enjoyable emotions. And then we generated a positive motivation for being here by thinking of our own personal aspirations and wishes regarding this material. Wow. Okay, I'm just checking out the answers here. Beautiful. These ones I'm not going to read out. Some of them are slightly personal, but I would invite everyone to read them. It's really wonderful to see that we are actually joining the session from all over the world. And of course, if we think about people who will later use the recording, goes even beyond that. But even in the here and now, we are a temporary intentional community, as it's sometimes described. But at the same time, we're a community that keeps meeting in many different ways. And some of us have friendly types of connections with each other, or in some cases, even romantic or familial and so forth. And it's just wonderful to think that's an idea that I have certainly been inspired by so many of my wonderful teachers. We are in these types of relationships, connections. We are basically a network of, well, we exist within multiple types of networks. And we are invited to then imbue all of these networks with the wonderful qualities that are available to us, with love, with compassion. As Dr. Russell Cultz once said, and some of you would be familiar with him as an expert on compassion-focused therapy, also frequently collaborates with Shervasti Abbey and the monastic teachers within that community. We are able to pump compassion into the world or into the networks that we exist in. And today we will talk about pumping more positive qualities into these networks, not just compassion, but also gratitude and awe and so many others. So let's explore that together. It is probably one of the best topics to be discussing. This is the structure that we're going to follow this time. Sometimes when we're doing these topical CEB sessions, they last 3 hours. And within that, we usually take a little break and we have a bit more time to do some exercises together in a more interactive manner. This one is more of a shorter session, more introductory in nature. So we will only spend 2 hours today and 21 minutes have already gone. But generally, the idea is that we will still hopefully be able to cover these 3 main topics. So we will first revisit the basics of CEB in general. I will just remind everyone about the nature of this training approach and some of the key ideas that would be quintessential for our discussion of the family of enjoyable emotions in particular. We will then explore that family itself by looking at the different emotions that are included into this range of experiences. We will talk about the common triggers for enjoyable emotions. We'll talk about their evolutionary role, and we will also, of course, analyze our own personal habits related to enjoyable emotions, because a huge part of establishing emotional balance is understanding our own habits and patterns related to each major emotional family. And then 4.3, we will just briefly reconnect to some important ideas or some potentially beneficial ideas that are potentially beneficial when it comes to working with enjoyable emotions. So that last part is a little bit like Cosmo's 10 tips for having a wonderful summer cocktail party. It's a little bit of that, because of course that list could be way more expansive, or it could be condensed into just one point, such as be always mindful, or practice heartfulness or kindfulness or whatever. And that would include everything, absolutely. Such general ideas are all encompassing. But we will kind of look at 3, 4, 5 general suggestions that might be a bit of a game changer for some of us, and certainly have been a game changer for me personally. And then we will be able to also share our experiences and ideas with each other. So it's not just, once again, these 10 tips from the CCN or from CEB or from Cosmopolitan. It's also all of us exchanging knowledge or sharing some basic ideas. So with that, even though this is an introductory session and there's going to be less group activity here, we're not going to be doing breakout groups this time. For example, we're not going to be having a voice question and answer session just to make it easier for us to create this recording and then later upload it and edit it and so forth. We will mostly be using the chat function in this case. Still, even the chat function can be used constructively or destructively. So these are just some basic reminders related to what we can share there. First of all, there's this idea of confidentiality. And for that reason, actually, when I invite some feedback from the group related to a specific question, please feel free to send your answer to me personally, if that feels more comfortable. I'm here under the name of the Contemplative Consciousness Network, as opposed to sending it to the common chat. Sometimes people prefer that when what they're sharing is deeply personal and they still want to contribute, but they just don't want people seeing that it's coming from them. And I'm always reading out these responses without naming people for that specific reason. But also that goes beyond just me. All of us here exchanging these ideas should respect the confidentiality when it comes to attribution. So whatever we are sharing here is confidential in a way, even though the voice part of it is being recorded. Then just shared respect, that means that we're respecting people's bodies, identities, feelings. We're not trying to offer unnecessary advice, because we're actually not being asked for advice in this case. We're not trying to comment on others people's physical appearance and so forth. And I'm only voicing those things because in the past they have happened in different communities and in different groups. So just being truly respectful of each other and trying to be very mindful with what we share with regards to impact. And that's another point here. Intent versus impact, very important for any kind of relationship or any kind of communication. Our intention might be good or innocent or harmless as we think, but the actual impact of our words might be different, because our words, once they're spoken, enter the realm of contextuality, in which people have different triggers, they exist within different cultures, words acquire different meanings and so forth. So we need to be aware of that level of reality. It's always best to speak with I statements, just sharing things about our own personal experience, especially in a class like this. And then finally, compassionate, engaged listening, when we are actually reading what others have shared in the chat, might be a wonderful opportunity, might present us with a wonderful opportunity to expand our horizons and actually to experience one of the most important enjoyable emotions, vitally important for our psychological well-being, but also potentially quite important for our physical health as well. And that's the positive emotion of awe, 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 which is, as more and more research projects are now trying to prove, is an experience of going beyond our limited vision to a sense of transcendence, vastness, interconnectedness, interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh's community calls it. And within that experience of vast transcendent interbeing, we find wonderful resources for survival and flourishing. So yeah, listening with compassion, with love, with empathy would always be a wonderful thing to explore. And here's an opportunity for all of us, and first and foremost me, to listen, because it is so important to know what brought all of us here, or why is it that we're choosing to spend 2 hours on a Sunday talking about things related to psychological well-being, contemplative practice, and so forth, why aren't we just enjoying the good weather? And this, of course, is a very general category. It's rainy here in London today after many, many days of sunny weather. It's finally raining a little bit, which is actually very refreshing and feels truly wonderful to me personally. But maybe some people would prefer to have sun today and to be out in the park sunbathing. So, this idea of wonderful weather is deeply personal and subjective, but still, we are indeed here together. So let's try to answer this question in the chat. I'm here because I'm facilitating this class. That's part of my job description for the CCN. But I'm also here because I find a lot of inspiration in this material. I find a lot of inspiration in seeing what people have to share when they connect to this material. And it is always beneficial for my own practice of emotional balance and emotional intelligence to revisit these points and to try to discuss them with others. That's why I'm here. But I would also be very curious to know about your personal experiences, ideas, feelings, aspirations here. So I'll just wait for things to start popping up in the chat, and then I'll read them out anonymously as usual. And also, if you want it to be truly anonymous, feel free to send the message to me personally. Yes, by the way, on the topic of the recording, yes, the session is, because I received a personal message here asked with a question about that. The session is being recorded. We will email the link along with some additional links to everyone who has signed up. And eventually, this recording will also appear on CCN's YouTube channel as a session that's open for everyone. But we will first be emailing it to you as the registered participants. So you will be getting a link, and if for some reason it doesn't appear within the next few days, feel free to email us so that we can resend that email, because sometimes emails get lost, right? So that's the idea there. Okay, and I'll just be sitting here waiting with a lot of curiosity to hear about what brought you here. All right, so the first observation here, already so concise and pertinent, to learn and find out how to be happier. And that's really it, right? Certainly when it comes to cultivating emotional balance as a program, one of the major goals for studying that program and for the very existence of that program is to make people happier. So that kind of includes everything, right? I want to become familiar with CEB ideas and approach. Wonderful, yeah. The next one, to reset, feel nourished by community and shared interests, create space to strengthen joy practices. Beautiful. And I love this idea of joy practices. It is something that I'm quite passionate about, because there's quite a few joy practices within the Buddhist tradition, and that's the tradition, the contemplative tradition that I've been trained in and that I have the strongest personal connection to. There are many joy practices across multiple other traditions as well. And then in addition to that, there's what we could call joy research coming from the scientific side, and at the same time, joy research coming from the side of the contemplatives, the experience and the knowledge that they've accumulated over multiple centuries of doing these joy practices on their own, together with their community and so forth. So that is such an incredibly rich field, but we don't often use that wording of, oh, I'm practicing joy, or I'm cultivating joy, I'm accessing different types of joy, right? It's just not always, at least for some cultures, not always at the forefront of what we do. And yet it is totally an option to explore. So beautiful. I intend to use that session to take some time for exploring emotional balance topic, once again, together with people who share same aspirations. Yeah, beautiful. So the value that we're exploring and the opportunity to do that within a community. There's a lot of beauty in it. And that's why the CCN, the organization that's hosting us today, of which I am an employee, is called Network, so that we can feel at all times connected to many, many individuals who share the same values or the same interests. I am here because I had a dark night of the soul recently and wanted to help myself to go through it. Yes, it is very, very pertinent as well to connect to joy practices after having gone through a difficult experience, whether that's spiritual or psychological or related to our outer circumstances or related to our physical health. Yeah. Just sunbathed in a park with friends, energized by the lovely and witty interaction, feeling content, joyful, and playful, here to rest and feel connected to people with the same values and aspirations, right? So we've had a moment of hedonic enjoyment. Now we're entering the domain of joy as it relates to our inner well-being. We're exploring some ideas connected to eudaimonic happiness together, happiness that comes from the inside. But beyond that, we will also talk about hedonic joy as well. Benefit from the community's shared learnings and adapt them to live a rich life. Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm here because I'm training as a meditation teacher and the subject is essential for me. Don't forget to smile. Well, exactly, yes. It is very important to have practices, ideas, and methods related to joy within our repertoire as practitioners or practitioner teachers or teacher practitioners, of course. And it is not uncommon actually to sometimes meet people who in their introduction to meditation are introduced to practices that feel a bit solemn, a bit serious, a bit heavy even when it comes to, for example, contemplating impermanence and contemplating the inevitability of our death and so forth. And because of that, they miss out on that wonderful element of joy, bliss, rapture, ecstasy, just all of these elevated experiences that can also be a huge part of our practice. But that being said, there are sometimes examples of the opposite, people being introduced to the elevated experiences, but missing out on the more serious half of it. So it's all about finding that balance, right? Find the key to inner peace and also improve my English. Well, wonderful. What a way to do both at the same time. I'm here because I'm curious about learning how to grow emotionally, build better relationships, bring more joy into the world, and manage my negative emotions. Right. So all very, very important goals. And I love this idea of building better relationships as one of the motivations for being in a class like this, because a lot of the CEB material is about communication, how to communicate our emotions in an effective and an efficient manner, in a non-confrontational manner also, or how to remain emotionally balanced so that we can show up in more healthy, more wholesome ways for all the relationships that we have. So that's a very interesting exploration. To learn more about the CEB approach and have more tools to cultivate happiness, that's goal number 1. And goal number 2, to learn language to communicate with other people regarding importance of emotional balance and mental training in general. People who may not be receptive, the Buddhist context, but quite receptive to the secular one. Yeah, that's very important in this day and age. As many people know, the patron of the CEB approach, the Dalai Lama, often says that we need to be very aware of the fact that 1 billion people on this planet are non-believers, as they describe themselves. They don't have any connections to any of the established religious, spiritual, or philosophical approaches. And that's very, very appropriate for them. We need to respect that, and we need to find ways to share some elements of contemplative practice in a way that would be accessible to everyone, and also would be accessible to people coming from multiple contemplative or spiritual or philosophical traditions. So that's exactly what we're exploring here, even though, as many people would know, some of the methods that we're going to be describing do indeed come from the Indo-Tibetan approach to mental training or to contemplative training. That's just the specific lineage and the specific methodology. Doesn't mean it's necessarily better than any other similar methodology, but it does mean that there is a history to it, and that there have been many generations of people who have explored these methods, practiced them, and have found them to be somewhat or extremely beneficial. And so stepping away from this idea of contemplative practice, though, we can look at the scientific understanding of emotions as embedded within the CEB, or Cultivating Emotional Balance approach. This is where we find this wonderful complementarity between the two, and then eventually discover that actually not that many contradictions. The contradictions arise when we talk about emotions from, let's say, the psychological side and the Buddhist side, and we ignore the fact that words mean different things within those two contexts. For example, the word anger, and there's quite a lot of debate about anger. Can anger ever be beneficial? Is it always destructive? And that's the Buddhist idea of anger, yada, yada, yada. There's so many different ways of looking at it. Well, those can be actually quite elegantly resolved if we looked at the differences between the way anger is defined and described within these two different contexts. Because the scientific idea of anger and the Buddhist idea of anger are not at all fully synonymous. There's a lot of nuance there. And if we unpack that nuance, then we will see that actually, yeah, there's quite a lot of complementarity between the two approaches. It's language that we struggle with. And so that's why there's a lot of value in really going into the nuance of it all. And to go into the nuance of it all, just to revisit the origins of CEB, many people would know that CEB, or Cultivating Emotional Balance, is a specific training approach which arose out of a Mind and Life conference with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and some other Buddhist contemplatives, and then many wonderful scientists, including Paul Ekman, including Richard Davidson, including Daniel Goleman. Other participants of that specific conference included Dr. Alan Wallace, who was one of the interpreters, Geshe Thupten Jinpa, who was one of the interpreters, Venerable Matthieu Ricard, who was one of the presenters, and so forth. Many people who have become household names within this entire domain of contemplative practice, meditation research, and the domain of Mind and Life conferences, within the work of Mind and Life Institute, which supports and organizes these conferences, and so forth. And that specific conference in the year 2000 was focused on destructive emotions. There have been other conferences on emotions within the Mind and Life timeline, but that specific one was on destructive emotions. Daniel Goleman later wrote it up as this book that you can see on the right, called Destructive Emotions. Very enlightening, actually, in many ways, and I think translated into multiple languages. But specifically, at the result of that conference, the Dalai Lama invited Dr. Paul Ekman, who was later joined by Dr. Alan Wallace and Dr. Eve Ekman in that project, and then some others as well, to create a training system which would transform the insights of that conference and all the underlying knowledge from the Buddhist side, from the scientific side, and so forth, into something that would be practically applicable. And what eventually arose was a 42-hour training modality that is the full Cultivating Emotional Balance program. Sometimes we also teach shorter versions of that in 12 hours, in 18 hours. Sometimes there's just a 3-hour CEB introduction as well. The full training takes 42 hours, and it has been, through the research, proven effective in bringing about many wonderful results in terms of lowering rates of depression, strengthening levels of compassion and empathy, teaching people to recognize facial expressions related to emotions better, and so forth, and many benefits that have been established through scientific research related to the full CEB program. And they do also express themselves even when we are doing a shorter program. It's just, of course, there's less time for practice and less space for exploration when we do a shorter one. Just as an example, later this year, we will be organizing an 18-hour version of that, co-sponsored with Tibet House US. So there's an opportunity to join that online if somebody wants. But beyond that, we are constantly trying to run these CEB courses, long ones, short ones, and so forth. Right now, we're just looking at a glimpse of that by looking specifically at the CEB approach to enjoyable emotions. And this in itself can be very beneficial because in these topical CEB offerings, sometimes related to shame, sometimes focused on fear, sometimes focused on anger, and so forth, we're already learning the basics of emotional science and the basics of contemplative practices related to these specific groups of emotions. So there's the full approach, sort of the full training program, and there's also the topical offerings that we can explore. And we're right now in one of those topical offerings focused on the enjoyable emotions. And as a preliminary note for that, and we will go into the idea or the definition for emotions in just a moment, the scientific definition of emotions that is used within the CEB approach. A note to the wise: not all types of joy are emotions, and the enjoyable emotional family is not at all limited to just joy. So two things, right? There are many types of joy that are not emotions in nature. There are mental states, yes, for sure, but not all types of joy are emotions. Some types of joy are moods. Some types of joy are traits. Some types of joy are specific mental states that do not fully fall under the definition of what an emotion is. So there are types of joy that are not emotional in nature. They're deeper than just the level of our emotions. And at the same time, the family of enjoyable emotions is the biggest family of emotions that we have. It's bigger than the fear family, bigger than the sadness family, and so forth. It's the biggest of the families. And there are many emotions within it that are not called joy in most of our languages. There are other emotions there that are not joy. So it's important to understand this nuance so that we don't think that every type of joy is an emotion or that every enjoyable family would be joy proper. It's not that. And I'm saying this because some people might already know the basics of CB approach through having seen Disney's Inside Out, Disney's animated movie about major emotional families, which is actually strongly based on Paul Ekman's original work. I should say without proper attribution, by the way. Within that, one of the sort of emotional characters is the character of joy. But that is, of course, a simplification used for the sake of creating wonderful animated experiences for children. It's wonderfully educational, especially with regards to the role of sadness in our life and so forth, but it is not at all reflective of the complexity of our joyful experiences. So this is a necessary note. So many, as it says here on the slide, many types of joy that are generated through contemplative practice, types of joy that are available to us through things like meditation, some embodied types of practices, including Tai Chi and some types of yoga and so forth. These do not fall under the category of emotions. They're not simply waves of energy that pass through us temporarily. There is something deeper. So that's important to recognize, because apart from this specific session, which is about enjoyable emotions, we do have quite a lot of materials on exploring these deeper types of joy through meditation and so forth. And we will also actually be organizing longer courses on connecting to joy in a more committed manner. Longer courses, maybe 8-week courses, 10-week courses, in which we will together slowly go through a sequence of practices for building and strengthening those joyful experiences within ourselves. Not simply the joyful emotions, but the deeper types of joy related to moods, traits, and so forth. So that is something that will be happening later this year. And beyond that, in the coming months after that, mostly through the CCN, the Contemplative Consciousness Network. So yeah, keep track of our schedule if you want to explore that. But for now, we'll focus on emotions. And the simplified definition of emotion that Eve Ekman has crafted for the CEB courses describes emotions as processes that are impacting our body, speech, and mind, that are influenced by our evolutionary and personal past, and that occur whenever something important to our welfare is occurring. So basically, we encounter something that is potentially important to us. For example, we see a snake in our room. Let's imagine we're in Australia and we're suddenly seeing a giant snake that has crawled into our room. From an evolutionary and personal point of view, we know, well, snakes are important as in we have to really be aware of their presence if we want to survive. And so our response to seeing that snake would be influenced by our evolutionary past, because our ancestors all the way back in the past knew of what snakes can do to us, to our health, to our life, and so forth. But also there might be a personal element to it as well. If we have some friends who have had unfortunate experiences with snakes, for example. So depending on all of that, the evolutionary past, the personal past, the response would be quite strong. And what would be that response? It would be, as I like to call it, a wave of energy coming through our body, through our speech, and through our mind. So it will come through our body, rush of energy, manifest as increased heartbeat. For example, feel fear. Fear is a very obvious emotion to feel, a very logical emotion to feel in that situation of seeing a giant snake. And fear would activate different parts of our body, actually feel like a wave rushing through our body, a very specific type of wave that affects different body parts, different organs, different response systems, actually to coordinate a response of fighting, fleeing, or freezing, which is the standard response to snake kind of situations. So we would most likely flee, maybe fight, or maybe just freeze and be in one place until the snake decides to go somewhere else, for example. So that's what happens on the level of our body. Then on the level of our speech, that same energy wave can manifest as an exclamation of sorts. Holy moly, that's a snake, we say, or something of that nature. Or we just scream in fear, which is something that I would probably do, just make a horrible noise. Or, you know, a lot depends on our cultural norms and our conditioning and so forth, but there might be some vocalization. And the stronger the response related to that trigger, the stronger the vocalization would be. So that's the energy rushing through our speech. And finally, through our mind, the same rush of energy will go through our mind and manifest as a specific mental state. For example, the mental state that we label fear or panic or terror or horror, and there's many others, of course, within that same family. So that's an emotion related to seeing a snake. Let's look at the more elaborate definition that is at the heart of CEB. That one was crafted by Paul Ekman, and it's based not simply on his own work. There's also the work of James Gross and some other scientists implicated in this definition as well. It's basically the same thing as what we have just seen with Eve's more abbreviated version. Emotion is a process, a particular kind of automatic appraisal. Automatic because our system, our body and mind, they are designed by evolution to respond almost automatically to these triggers to help us survive. So a particular kind of automatic appraisal here means that we are assessing the situation and we are seeing it through a certain lens. We're interpreting in a certain way. So we're seeing a snake and we're interpreting it as a potential source of danger, for example. Influenced by our universal and personal past, that one we have discussed already, in which we sense that something important to our welfare is occurring, for example, the presence of a snake. And it is a process that includes a set of physiological and psychological changes and behaviors that begin to deal with a situation. So once that rush of energy, the energy wave of an emotion, goes through our body, speech, and mind and manifests as increased heartbeat and you know, our palms getting sweatier and the vocalization and just the mental state of fear, once all of that has happened, there's also the behavior part of it, because we might indeed start running away or fighting, or we'll just freeze. 3 common responses to fear, or behavioral expressions of fear. And then in particular, emotions are thought to have arisen because they efficiently coordinate diverse response systems, therefore helping us respond to important challenges or opportunities. So we need emotions as part of our physical and mental repertoire, because sometimes we just don't have the time for elaborate analytical activity when it comes to important triggers. When we are faced with a snake or a potential car crash or something positive, but something that requires our fast attention, We need a response system that would be more fast in nature than just us sitting there and thinking, oh no, it's a snake. What is it that I'm supposed to do now? I don't know. So that takes too much time for us to survive. So to help us survive, the evolutionary nature imbued us, nature as manifesting through evolution imbued us with this mechanism. And this mechanism can absolutely be out of touch with reality. It can work very, very properly. It can be balanced essentially or unbalanced. And that's why we're talking about emotional balance. If the whole mechanism is balanced, our responses to these triggers would be conducive to our own well-being and to the well-being of others. And that, of course, can also manifest, amongst other things, in the domain of enjoyable emotions. But for now, let's just do a very simple exercise. So this is not even a formal meditation, in that you don't have to adopt a specific meditation position. If you don't want to, you can just remain in the same posture as before, in the same position as before, but just trying to notice whether there is indeed an energy wave coming through body, speech, and mind, through our body, speech, and mind right now. Is there a specific emotion rushing through us right now? Just checking. And if we are noticing a specific emotion, how does it express itself on the level of our body? How does it express itself on the level of our speech? How does it express itself on the level of our mind? It's also quite possible that most of us would not be having any emotions right now. That's very understandable, because we're not right now, for most of us, faced with an important trigger. Therefore, there's no triggering of an emotional experience. But we can still look at our body, speech, and mind and see, how does it feel right now in the absence of strong emotions? And then let's think of a thing, of an event that we're strongly anticipating in a positive way, something that we're really looking forward right now. Let's say within the next couple of weeks. For some, it would just be having ice cream later today, or going to bed. For some, a visit from a loved one, a meeting with friends. It could be anything, intense or small, but let's imagine that we are already in that situation. Already facing that positive experience that we are now simply anticipating. And then as we are imagining ourselves in that situation, let's check to see how that affects our emotional field, and whether there is indeed anything new coming up now in our body, in our speech, and in our mind. How do our body, speech, and mind feel now when we're imagining ourselves in that exciting situation? How does it feel in the body? How does it want to express itself on the level of our speech? How does it feel on the level of our mind? What's the emotional tone of it? And then we come back to the body, just noticing the process of breathing. And we conclude the practice itself. Coming back once again to our shared space and to the physical space around us as well, to ground ourselves there. So let's take a moment to reconnect to our reality after this exercise in imagination, related to enjoyable emotions, actually. Everything that we just experienced potentially through this act of imagination would be exactly what's pertinent for the discussion of enjoyable emotions. But before that, just a little bit more on the nuanced understanding of emotions that is embedded within CEB as a model, and CEB as a model is based not only on Paul Ekman's work of multiple decades and Eve Ekman's work, of course. No, there's a lot of emotional science brought in from other researchers. Sometimes in some longer programs, we even invite people to attempt to read 1 or 2 academic articles on the theme, only for those who want that, because it's not an easy read, not always. But there's a lot of emotional science that's embedded in this training modality. And there's a lot of contemplative science embedded within this modality, and contemplative practice, contemplative discoveries. But then eventually it all boils down to our own personal observation of our personal emotional landscape. But one important distinction that's included and described in the CEB model is the distinction between destructive and constructive emotional episodes. So when we have a specific emotional experience, it can be, depending on how we respond to it, what we do with it, either destructive or constructive. So destructive emotional episodes are enacted in regrettable ways that are incompatible with our own and others' happiness and well-being. So we might have an emotional episode, and that emotional episode, within the larger context of everything else, instead of contributing to happiness, well-being, and so forth, contributes to greater suffering for ourselves and for others. Totally possible, easy to imagine. Let's say we have an emotional episode of anger, and instead of regulating the energy of that anger and finding a constructive way of dealing with it, and there's many approaches to how to accomplish that, we just express that anger by throwing plates at people, and then we hurt someone, and then of course that damages our reputation, our relationships, and so forth. So a very clear example of a regrettable episode. Most of these regrettable episodes would be often connected to the emotional families of anger and so forth. But actually, sometimes even enjoyable emotions can be enacted in a destructive way. So that's something that we will talk about and try to imagine as well. And then constructive emotions are those that are enacted in a way that is conducive to our own happiness, to the happiness of others. There's always connection between the two because we exist within interdependence, actually. And they also have an ability to further, to strengthen our cooperation and collaboration. So to give another example, we could have a moment of anger, an emotional episode of anger. We get irritated, let's say with our romantic partner, because they're being slightly crazy in this specific situation. That's our assessment. Oh, what is this? That's how we feel about it. We get irritated, and then instead of throwing plates at them, which is never advisable in any relationship, to be honest, but instead of throwing plates, we use that moment of irritation to have an intelligent conversation. And we, for example, use the CEB skills of conveying our emotional experiences. And then through that, we actually deepen mutual understanding, mutual appreciation, mutual empathy. That, of course, would rely on the other person also being emotionally open, available, empathetic, emotionally intelligent enough to have that conversation with them, and so forth. So that's actually not something that we need to be taking for granted. But that is an example of a constructive emotional episode, even though the emotion at the heart of it, anger, is often described as universally destructive. It has destructive elements to it, but it was enacted in this case in a skillful manner. We did something skillful with it. So that's the difference between the two. So when we're looking at enjoyable emotions, we will see that some of them can be destructive in specific cases, or just in terms of how they operate. And then there's the distinction between pleasant and unpleasant emotions, which is once again not always obvious, because, for example, sadness can be pleasant or unpleasant. There are pleasant type of sadness that some people like to go into. I have friends who have playlists of sad music that they love to go through to feel a deep feeling of nostalgia, for example, or an indescribable longing that is a form of sadness in that specific case. There are certainly people who love to go to sad romantic movies, or to romantic movies that include an element of everyone crying their eyes out. Now, in the same way that some people love the experiences of fear, and for that reason love watching horror movies. And for similar reasons, sometimes there's an element of pleasure to anger as well that some people experience when they're, for example, doing, I don't know, boxing or something of that nature. So pleasant and unpleasant, there's a deeper level to it all. And on that level, that's where Buddhism says that, well, actually, these mental states are always at the deepest level unpleasant. These mental states are always at the deepest level pleasant. But on a more superficial level, there's pleasant and unpleasant tones to emotions in a way that we don't always recognize. Sometimes sadness feels good, sometimes sadness feels bad. However, with enjoyable emotions, that's their common characteristic. They're actually pleasant emotions. That's why they're all lumped together as one giant family of emotional experiences. And another thing to know, and many people have done CEB courses in the past would remember this, and for some this would be a new discovery. Emotions are transitory. They're very short in duration, between 30 and 90 seconds, sometimes just a couple of seconds. For example, for the emotion of surprise, which is the briefest of our emotions. Sometimes they go on a bit longer. Sadness can be a bit longer than 90 seconds. But normally, if emotion lasts longer, it means that we had an episode of this emotion, then we re-triggered it, and that's how it keeps going on. But a discrete episode is about 30 to 90 seconds. And it always has a specific trigger, something that triggered our body, speech, and mind to induce that energy wave rushing through us. However, moods are a completely different thing. Moods are more stable mental states that are kind of in the background of our mind and that affect everything that we go through. So we might have an irritable mood on a specific day, a joyful mood. We'll talk about two moods related to enjoyable emotions. And we might have a fearful mood, as in we're kind of a bit anxious the entire day with no specific trigger to it, or with multiple triggers that contribute to that state, but that state itself has not been just induced by one specific event, for example. Then there are traits, and some types of joy indeed are cultivated consciously so as to become traits of our personality, stable qualities that are always there with us. Traits can be negative, or sort of traits can be problematic. Being an irritable person is a bit of a problem for us, for others, and so forth, or being quite strongly anxious at all times, more easily afraid. That can be a trait that is not always easy to live with. But there are certainly traits related to enjoyable emotion that we can strengthen within ourselves. And that would be a wonderful gift, actually, for both ourselves and others. And finally, there are disorders, and disorders occur when a specific propensity for emotions has become unbalanced and is now interfering with our life. So, for example, there are anger-related disorders, there are anxiety-related disorders, there are disorders related to very profound states of sadness that go into depression and so forth. So there's generally this sort of range of different experiences. And all four of these categories can be related to one specific word, like anger or sadness or joy and so forth. But we do need to eventually establish this granularity or this clarity with regards to whether we're talking about emotions, enjoyable emotions, that's what we're going to focus on today, or being in a joyful mood, or having joy as a trait, and that's something that we can actually work on quite strongly, or whether we're having some emotional disorder related to anger, for example. So we talked about emotional expressions already in terms of the changes that occur in our body and in our vocalization, but beyond that, emotions always manifest in our face, they sometimes manifest in our speech, manifest in our gestures. Well, universal emotions manifest in our face. Some culturally specific emotions don't have universal facial expressions associated with them. But enjoyable emotions, that's a very large family. That's something quite universal in that all humans have access to them across all the cultures. And there is sort of a general signal for them that we're now going to look at. I'm going to talk about emotional timelines right now. Let's just start looking at joyful emotions themselves. So joyful emotions like anger, like sadness, just like the family of anger, just like the family of sadness, just like the family of disgust, for example, the family of surprise. Enjoyable emotions is a large family that has arisen partly in response to our evolutionary needs. And the evolutionary needs that enjoyable emotions respond to is the necessity to motivate us to participate in something social or personal. So enjoyable emotions, for example, that's a very clear situation to refer to. Enjoyable emotions are necessary to motivate us to procreate. So one of the evolutionary needs for enjoyable emotions was to motivate primates that we have descended from to enter sexual union so that little baby monkeys would be made. There needed to be an emotional trigger, an emotional mechanism related to that. Another example is collaboration, cooperation, joint celebrations, jointly collecting food, looking after one another, finding fleas in each other's hair. All of those things needed mechanisms that would inspire individual primates to participate in those activities. There would need to be some enjoyable emotions that a mother experiences when the mother is connecting to the baby, mothering the baby. And there would also need to be enjoyable mechanisms, enjoyable emotional mechanisms on the side of the baby when the baby is feeling mothered by a specific individual. So there's all these wonderful mechanisms that have been established overall over multiple, thousands, hundreds of thousands of years in order to motivate us to participate in these joint activities. But not all of these activities are social, because we also have enjoyable emotions that motivate us to explore the deeper dimensions of consciousness, to find bliss that goes beyond just the passing sensory bliss or just the bliss of social connections. We have emotions that motivate us to undertake a spiritual quest. And if you've read the biographies of great contemplatives from multiple traditions, and I don't want to only be making Buddhist references here, but if you, for example, have read the biography of Sri Ramakrishna, for example, there's a wonderful version of it written by Christopher Esherwood, the same one who wrote A Single Man, which was also later turned into a movie by Tom Ford, yada, yada, yada. Within that, you would be learning about how the boy who eventually became Sri Ramakrishna, one of the most important Hindu saints of late 19th, early 20th century, he always had that very strong pull towards a contemplative life, and elements of religious, spiritual, contemplative experiences would be triggering huge experiences of joy for him, whether and the opposite of that would be making him sad or bored and so forth. So once again, the same mechanisms, in his case, oriented towards exploring the deeper dimensions of consciousness. But overall, the common theme is there. It's pulling us towards greater degrees of well-being, greater degrees of joy, greater degrees of happiness. That's why these emotional experiences exist. And if we're able to calibrate them skillfully, we would be able to make sure this entire mechanism of joy within us is indeed taking us to greater and greater degrees of sustainable well-being, as opposed to simply the very passing pleasures that we cannot really recreate. We try to, but it doesn't really work. And then we end up very disappointed. And then that's the end of it. So there needs to be some calibration happening at all times, which is where we, as you have mentioned already, do joy practices. We don't simply do joy practices in that we are simply inducing different individual experiences of joy. No, we also do practices that will help us establish sustainable types of joy that can be revisited again and again on a daily basis, types of joy that are available to us at all times eventually, types of joy that pervade our nervous system all the time. That's one of the benefits, for example, of mindfulness of breathing, as originally taught by the Buddha. The Buddha said that if we go deep enough in mindfulness of breathing, it would induce joy and bliss, two interrelated qualities that would be constantly pervading our existence, our nervous system, how we experience our body, how we experience our mind. So the excitement that brings us to that point, the excitement that inspires us to do that training and then experience those deeper types of joy, which would then not be emotional nature. The excitement, this original excitement that inspires us, is an enjoyable emotions coming straight from this family. And we can use it as a tool for these profound psychological quests. So just a very simple example here as well. These can be triggered by such experiences as being reunited with a person you love. You haven't seen your mom in a long time, and finally you're visiting her somewhere in the middle of Siberia, and oh, wonderful, joyful experience. Or you haven't seen your partner a long time, or you haven't seen your friends, you haven't seen your cat or your dog. Absolutely, what a joy. And more so for the animals themselves, well, a bit less for cats, but probably many people have seen those videos of a dog being reunited with the owner after months of not seeing each other. I've seen a video of the owner finding his dog after the dog was lost and was living on the street for several years, and finally was able to bumped into it randomly somewhere on the street, and the dog recognized him. It's just the explosion of bliss within the dog's body and mind, a wave of energy that is so overpowering, just the screaming and jumping that's happening. But that's an enjoyable emotion of that kind, triggered by this very thing. Or spending time with the people you love. Just today in the chat, we had this example of sunbathing with some friends. It's all nice, they're all witty, you're enjoying it, you're also feeling witty in that moment, and you're feeling like you're being accepted. It's a more quiet type of joy compared to the joy of that dog being found in the street after many years of being lost, right? But nonetheless, something relatable. Then the birth of a desired child, for people who are parents, and especially for people who are parents who wanted to have that child and were really anticipating that child. Maybe we're trying to have a child for many years and finally it happened. Just the explosion of joy of bringing this being into the world, right? That can be incredibly powerful. And then simply consensual sexual relationships, especially when there is a deeper degree of connection felt on multiple levels. Oh, well, that's one of the reasons for why these emotions exist in the first place, to motivate us. And a private message here, the same thing happens to me when I see my ex again. Yeah, well, if we manage to have positive relationships or positive attitude towards people we're no longer actively in a relationship with, even then, it can be bringing about these enjoyable emotions. And so can memories. That's another powerful trigger for all the types of emotions, including enjoyable emotions. And then the main signal, the main facial signal for enjoyable emotions, that's across the board, is an authentic smile. So what's an authentic smile? I'll just describe it very briefly, but if you want more detailed information about that, one of the references for CEB in general is a book by Paul Ekman called Emotions Revealed. Usually when people go through the 42-hour version of this program, we invite them to read that book, and it has many pictures of Eve Ekman displaying different emotions, which probably is not at all embarrassing for her all these years later. Yeah, I'm sure it's also it definitely is translated into Russian. There must be also Spanish versions of it, French versions, and so forth. So I just dropped the name in the chat, Emotions Revealed. So there's a chapter on joy there, and there are photographs displaying the difference between this genuine smile, Duchenne smile, as it's sometimes called, and an artificial smile. So that artificial smile is something we use for diplomacy. Genuine smile happens when there's also a tightening here. So not just our lips, but also tightening around our eyes. And then you can also see genuine enjoyment, genuine joy in the way someone is responding to you or to a specific situation. And a genuine smile can be induced artificially by people. That's what actors, for example, do. They can indeed awaken a feeling enjoying themselves, and through that turn their diplomatic smile into an actual genuine smile. Totally possible. It's just to achieve that smile, they need to generate an actual enjoyable emotion, which is totally doable. But then there's also, as some people know, the flip side of that, in that we can smile and through that trigger positive emotions. And there's many wonderful reasons to be doing that. In the longer version of the CB, we in the slides that I use, at least, we sometimes quote Lily Tomlin, who many people would know is a wonderful comedian from the United States, and the quote goes along the lines of, always try to smile unless a man tells you to, in which case never smile. And the idea is that always trying to smile actually does strengthen and activate many of the same responses, emotional mechanisms that we usually hope would activate on their own or through pleasant encounters. No, we can access quite a lot of that material through artificially smiling, in the same way that our facial expressions related to other emotions can also lead to us actively experiencing those emotions. We can make the facial expression of anger and indeed become somewhat irritated. So that's all established through quite solid research. But with a smile, there's a lot of wonderful ideas related to it, in that there are longitudinal studies showing the connection between genuine smiling and longevity. There's been two research projects that we sometimes quote in CEB, one related to baseball players in the 1950s, another one related to Catholic nuns. Those were the subjects of those research studies. Basically, photographs of the baseball players and diary entries of the nuns were analyzed, and it was shown that genuine or authentic smile in the photographs of those baseball players was an accurate predictor for their longevity. And it goes as far as to say the presence of an authentic smile in their pictures meant that there are twice that the likelihood of them dying in any given year was only 50%, compared to the people who did not display an authentic smile. So that's statistics. That's beyond me in some ways. I'm just quoting the summary of that research. For the nuns, the research was on their diary entries. And once again, there was a very clear connection between them displaying in their diary entries enjoyable emotions and their longevity. So let's say the nuns who were more able to tap into gratitude, awe, enjoyment, contentment, on general displayed much stronger longevity than those who described a smaller amount of positive emotions. There's probably many other research projects of the same nature. And then there's definitely now an increasing number of research projects related to specific parts of this emotional families. There's incredible research on gratitude. There's incredible research on awe. We will include links related to both these very important states. There's some summaries about awe, and there's a wonderful white paper compiled by the Greater Good Science Center, of which Eve Ekman is a part, on gratitude and the benefits of gratitude. And both awe and gratitude are parts of this enjoyable emotional family. But now let's step back and let's think, well, what are some of the pleasant emotions or enjoyable emotions that I know? And of course, I know that in this case, we are coming actually from multiple language groups. I'm not a native speaker of English myself, for sure. You have noticed. And many of us would not be. But still, we're using this as a lingua franca, even though it's not franca at all, well, not anymore. We're using it as a common language to communicate with each other. And we would know some words related to enjoyable emotions in English. So let's try and share them in the chat. What are some of the enjoyable emotions that come to mind? I've already named 2, awe and gratitude, and joy, 3. I guess I've named 3, but let's see if anything else comes up before we'll look at the more orderly presentation of it from the scientific side. By the way, it's very hard to give an incorrect answer generally, because it's not a final list of all the emotions. That list does not exist, and it could not exist because there are many emotions that are not universal. They're culturally existent, and that doesn't mean they don't exist. They exist within specific cultures. Many people have seen these description of unique words denoting very specific emotions, let's say in Japanese or in the Scandinavian languages. And actually all the languages have unique words of that nature. For my Russian speakers here, the emotional experience of toska is so unique that that word itself, not perfectly translatable into English, is quoted in English language as a unique emotional experience that is not known in many other parts of the world. So that's quite interesting. In a similar nature, there are many emotions that are completely uniquely described in different cultures. So there's not an exhaustive list of emotions, and therefore many answers would be correct. Most answers would be correct. Bliss, absolutely. Ecstasy, yes, definitely. Joy, love, happiness, for sure. Reverence, yeah. Anticipation, wonder, delight, yeah. Contentment, peace, surprise, yeah, for sure. Peace, admiration, rapture, yeah. All beautiful words, and all actually coming straight from the list of emotions that we will see a bit later. But all of these are indeed enjoyable emotions. Surprise is the only one, and that's why I said almost every answer is correct. Surprise is indeed a thing that can have 2 emotions within it. The thing with surprise is that there is a separate emotional family of surprise. But we can also talk about being pleasantly surprised, and that would be us having just the emotion of surprise proper, and that is usually very, very, very brief in nature. It's just a couple of seconds at best, something very, very brief. And that turns into sort of being surprised, but in a pleasant manner. So surprise from that point of view would be like being pleasantly surprised is an enjoyable emotion. Just the surprise itself of being like, oh, that's another emotional family. Yeah, so just within, in terms of that, I would divide the 2 very slightly. They are divided in Paul Ekman's work into 2 separate categories, because surprise has a different system of facial responses, facial signals, body signals, vocal signals, and so forth. But indeed, when we're talking about a pleasant surprise, that from that point of view, it is correct. So we can list some emotions right here. So there's, first of all, sensory enjoyment. Within more elaborate CB descriptions, it is sometimes broken down into visual enjoyment, auditory enjoyment, olfactory enjoyment, pleasant smells, right? Tactile enjoyment, and enjoyment related to taste. So these are in themselves different types of not simply stimulation, but what happens within us when that stimulation hits the target, when it activates us in the correct way. So we might just take a sip of the wonderful tea that we enjoy, or just listen to that new song that came out from our favorite artist and just have that moment of joy, or feel the joy of being touched by someone or touching a pleasant texture somewhere. Some people feel sensory enjoyment of their body feeling pleasantly tired after working out, for example. That's a type of joy. That's an enjoyable emotion because it is an experience that will pass through us. It activates our body, our speech, our mind in specific ways. It will pass. It will not stay forever. And it will not last for that long. But while it lasts, wonderful. Yeah? And of course, we can then think about the specific mechanisms of endorphin release and all those sorts of things, which are studied by neuroscience, neurobiology, neurochemistry, and all those very important fields of knowledge. But from the more psychological and contemplative point of view, we just observe that, oh, sensory enjoyment. There are many very different kinds of it and many triggers for it, but how wonderful. Then there's amusement, which is when we find something funny. And there's, of course, different discussions about, well, what is laughter actually? Is it not merely a response to pain? As in, like, we find something that so unbearable that our nervous system explodes with laughter. That's how some types of humor work. Something is so awkward that we explode with laughter. But those discussions are more philosophical in nature, or let's say more theoretical in nature, whereas an actual amusement is an experience, an emotional experience that can also, through training or through personal propensities, turn into a trait. Some people who have a good sense of humor, who laugh easily, who perceive the world as being somewhat crazy and somewhat funny, that's a trait for them. But the individual instances of that, that's an emotion. Then there's relief, right? We were, for example, nervous about something, anxious about something, or we were just under a lot of physical pressure, let's say, doing that last set of squats. And then there's just relief of, oh, now it's over. Oh, this class is finally over. That will be all of us in 30 minutes, unless you depart early, which I can totally understand. But no, it's just relief of something ending and with a positive experience for us. Then there's elevation when we're feeling certain emotional, like our emotional energy is in a high place because of the activity that we're engaged in. There's fiero, which is an Italian word, and that denotes successfully facing a challenge. So we're succeeding in a specific competition, we're succeeding in a specific battle, we're succeeding in a specific thing, project, an interview, an online competition or a chef's competition, whatever it is, or we're just succeeding in our sort of battle with ourselves. It's like, yes, I did successfully accomplish that task. I did succeed in finally cleaning the toilet. And that's powerful experiences of being victorious in a way. There's excitement, that's more or less clear. Rapture, bliss, ecstasy, these three are quite strongly interrelated with each other, and they denote a very pleasant feeling that abides within our body, speech, and mind, or within our nervous system. We can look at it that way. And then there's nahes, which is a Yiddish word denoting a sense of pride for the accomplishment of our children or mentees. So people that we have served as a mentor. We were their mentor, now they're succeeding, or we are their parent, now they're succeeding. And there's a sense of pride appreciation for the accomplishment. That's a unique, a very specific, pleasant, enjoyable emotion that is nonetheless quite important to recognize and actually to cultivate if we are mentors or parents. Because if we don't have that strongly enough present within us, and if we're not able to share that, it is quite possible to be in a mentor-mentee, parent-child relationship where the child would constantly feel like they are a disappointment for us. The mentee would always feel that they're disappointing us because we're not feeling that nice, or we're feeling it, but we're not able to convey it to them, therefore not supporting a full feedback cycle, therefore not nurturing them, but also not nurturing ourselves. So then the whole thing becomes a bit difficult for everyone involved. So a very specific emotion, but very important. Then the sense of awe, there's some complementarity, or there's some connection between wonder and awe. Wonder is more of a sense of, oh, how wonderful, quite literally. We might be looking at our friend and thinking, oh, you're such a wonderful person. It's like, wow. And awe might be a bit similar to that, but as I've mentioned earlier, that's part of what you will see in one of the articles on awe that we will send out as an additional link. Awe is something that connects us to vastness and transcendence. So and a sense of awe can arise when we're looking at the vast vistas somewhere in nature, but some people experience awe when looking at Paris from the top of the Eiffel Tower, or when they look at the murals in the Sixtine Chapel, or anything. Awe can be inspired by something that is just so much greater than us. Whereas wonder can arise simply from looking at a bug. Oh, isn't nature incredible? Isn't that little fella incredible? Look at him go. Then gratitude, a very obvious one in a way, but not always easy to practice, and yet so important. So many benefits associated with it. David Loy, who is one of the authors working in the field of eco-dharma, and actually the author of the book named Eco-Dharma, which we often use in this entire field of work and knowledge, within that book talks about, and he's a Buddhist scholar himself and a philosopher, he talks about how, in his understanding, gratitude should almost be the fifth immeasurable, in addition to love, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. And by the way, all the four immeasurables are included in the full version of CEB. There's detailed instruction on each one of them. There's time to practice each one of them because they're so important for emotional balance. But gratitude is very important as well. And in Buddhism, gratitude also plays an important role. It's just in the Indo-Tibetan tradition of the mind, gratitude is often translated in slightly different ways, because the root of it is a mental function called appreciation. And sometimes for that reason, it's called appreciation. And sometimes the same thing is actually even translated as devotion, which kind of takes our attention in a completely different direction. But the root of it is the same thing, the ability to appreciate something truly. And it's very important for balanced mental functioning. Then Schadenfreude, which is a very important concept to explore, to unpack, and to slowly, potentially weed out, is the joy that we feel at the misfortunes of others. Now, there's, of course, contextuality to everything. So if we're talking about feeling joy at our oppressor finally falling and crumbling, that's very different from just feeling nasty joy about the misfortunes of others when those others have not done anything wrong towards us, at least. So there's, of course, contextuality to everything, and that always needs to be unpacked and taken into consideration. But in general, actually, a lot of the problematic things that are happening on this planet right now would not be happening, that's my working hypothesis, if we were able to create healthy cultures in which there's strong propensity for rejoicing. Oh, how wonderful this country next door is flourishing. Oh, how wonderful these people on the other side of the planet are flourishing. As opposed to, oh no, they don't. I'm not going to let them flourish. I'm gonna come and ruin their party. If there was less of that and more of the actual empathetic joy and rejoicing happening, that would be a very wonderful thing. So Schadenfreude is an example of an enjoyable emotion that is in most cases destructive. It's certainly destructive for our own well-being. And it's very destructive, especially if we actively express it, for our social relationships as well. No one likes a person who does a lot of Schadenfreude, just like no one likes a person who constantly talks shit about others, so there's a lot of nuance, of social nuance to all of this. So this one is we really want to look at very closely and to unpack as well. And then there's contentment, just feeling content with what we have, feeling we have enough, feeling satisfied with what we have. And that one is closest to a mood, in that one does not simply pass through us in 30 or 90 seconds. It can be lasting quite long, and it can become a mood, and it can become a trait. So being content generally with our existence would not at all mean that we're not motivated and so forth, but would just mean that, yeah, there's a certain sense of balance, satisfaction, joy about what we already have. Contentment is strengthened by most of these other enjoyable emotions, by the way. They're all combined. And in addition to that, we would need to have a certain order in our other emotional families, and certainly a lot of balance within the 4 domains of our psyche that are described in CEB: cognitive, conative, attentional, and emotional. If we establish this entire system, that's how contentment can come to be at the forefront of our experience, and that would be a wonderful, wonderful state to abide in. But that takes years and decades of practice, and we'll get there one day. But it's actually even wonderful to step here and think, which of these emotional experiences would I like to strengthen in my life? So please take a mental note of that. There will be a moment to share that in the chat in just about 1 second. But before that, I'm going to show you this slide. This is literally a screenshot or partial screenshot from the Ekman's Atlas of Emotions. So some people know Paul and Eve Ekman, upon the request of the Dalai Lama, have worked with multiple scientists and their work for many years and have created a wonderful tool called the Atlas of Emotions. It is very important and vitally important for CEB as a program, because it comes from the same authors, the same patron, from the same types of research and so forth. But it's also actually quite helpful for just people in general. And here, within the family of enjoyable emotions, the Ekmans present different types of enjoyable experiences in terms of their intensity. So it starts with sensory pleasures. Oh yeah, a good cup of coffee. Okay, sure, wonderful, important. And to appreciate that cup of coffee, and to really, and I apologize for the pun, to milk that cup of coffee for actual deeper levels of joy contained within it, that's a skill in itself. That's an incredible type of training that is so brilliantly presented in the secular mindfulness tradition, but also, for example, by Thich Nhat Hanh's community of practice and so forth. Well, that is skill in itself, to actually have sensory pleasure in an intelligent manner, in a balanced manner. But beyond that, then there's rejoicing about the joys and the good actions of others. There's compassion and joy as simply types of kindness spreading out from our heart towards others. Amusement, Schadenfreude, relief, peace, fiero, which is this experience of succeeding, being victorious. Pride, and here pride that's not the mortal sin of pride. It's also not arrogance or conceit. It's not pride as a negative mental state that's sometimes described. In Buddhism, there's 2 different words in Tibetan. There's different words for this kind of negative pride and just the positive sense of being proud about our achievements. That's a positive thing that's described here in this case. And similarly, a specific subset of pride is nahis, being proud about the victories of our children, of our mentees, being a proud parent. That's a wonderful thing actually to have, also to eliminate competitiveness between us and the next generation. Because the last thing this world needs right now is the previous generation feeling competitive about how well the next generation is doing in the domains of emotional balance and, let's say, environmental protection. Oh, how dare they be so good about it? Oh, how dare they be so passionate about it? No, I'm going to stop all of that. Oof. Can't imagine the mental state that could be worse for the planet right now. Well, apart from greed and others, right? So we do need to have that as well, cultivate it. And there's wonder, that feeling of something being wonderful. Wow, what a cup of coffee, incredible. And then excitement, and finally ecstasy or bliss, rapture. So that's kind of the slope of intensity there, but we need all of these to a certain degree, except for Schadenfreude, and these can be cultivated, each one in their unique way. And that's the beauty of it. That's why this is the biggest emotional family. For many of those, or for most of those, there's a separate technique on how to cultivate that. Cultivating gratitude is not the same as cultivating ecstasy. It's not the same as cultivating wonder. They are all unique. That's why this family of joy practices is so large. Whereas fear, the family of fear, is just different intensities of fear. So the techniques we would be using for panic would be equally appropriate for anxiety, would be equally appropriate for worry, and so forth. It's just the same fear with kind of the added intensity that keeps growing, keeps climbing up at each new level. Joy is quite diverse. And these are just the emotional experiences of joy, because as we've mentioned in the very beginning, there are also contemplative types of joy. There are joyful traits, joy-related traits. There are joyful moods. So it's a large thing that we're tapping into. And it's so wonderful to actually pay attention to it. That's why so many people have enjoyed the Book of Joy, which is sort of a description of conversations between the Dalai Lama and Bishop Tutu, both of whom actually embody most of these types of joy, if not all of them, except for Schadenfreude, once again, to a great and wonderful degree. That's why the book became such a bestseller. It's not that they're sharing incredible philosophical points about, I don't know, the nature of black holes and quantum reality and things like that. That's not what the book about. It's about tapping into all of these different things in a very simple and elegant way. So that's another wonderful source. So now let's come back to this idea of your own life and think, well, which of these enjoyable emotions are most strongly present in your own life right now? No need to think about, oh, when I was 5 years old. Oh, maybe if you want to, but in general, right now, let's say within the last few months, which of these types of joy which of these enjoyable emotions, let's say, have you been noticing the most? And then the flip side of that, which enjoyable emotions would you like to strengthen, to experience more frequently than you do right now? So let's spend a moment here and consider. And once again, if you already forgot what was said on previous slides, it doesn't matter. Just think of the words that speak to you right now. What types of enjoyable emotions are you feeling most commonly right now? Which ones would you want to strengthen and experience more frequently? Okay, let me read out some of the observations in the chat. Like to strengthen contentment and gratitude. Well, that's why, for that reason, I actually hope that the white paper on gratitude that we will share, and I'll actually include the links now as well, but we will be sending them out later for you to find them in your email box as well. I hope that that will be source of inspiration. And we are preparing a number of gratitude meditations recorded on audio in English and Russian, hopefully also in Spanish, maybe also Portuguese. So over time, like these incredible emotions hopefully would become stronger in our lives. Absolutely. Okay, so contentment, sensory pleasure, rejoicing, awe, wonder, delight, gratitude, gladness are the ones that you're already experiencing, and then like to strengthen fiero. Yeah, indeed, actually, that's in a way an interesting thing to even imagine, just like feeling we're succeeding and feeling the delight of that more frequently. Absolutely. Present sensorial pleasure, strength and gratitude. Yeah, many people might recall a very famous quote from Meister Eckhart, very frequently quoted even in Buddhist books these days. It's about how if there was only one prayer, that prayer would be, if we only had one prayer, it would be enough if that prayer was thank you. You know, and Meister Eckhart, of course, is a Christian mystic, so the wording is from the point of view of prayer and so forth. But just that idea of if there was one thing to rely on in terms of our emotional well-being and connection to more profound reality, that would be gratitude. Very powerful thing to explore. And sensory, I think, already present, and to grow rapture and gratitude. Yeah. Joy, awe, wonder, present peace, and would like to have more amusement and pride. Yeah, absolutely. Pride is an appreciation of the positive qualities within ourselves, the projects we've been able to accomplish successfully. There, once again, with all of these qualities, including pride, there are balanced techniques for cultivating them, or there are techniques for cultivating them in a balanced manner that would not at all turn us into arrogant jerks when we're cultivating pride, into hedonists when we're cultivating the ability to enjoy sensual pleasures, and so forth. That's what we'll look at in a moment, the techniques for strengthening the enjoyable emotions in our life. And then present sensory pleasure, contentment, love, would love to experience more awe, joy, rapture, love. Yeah, absolutely. Please be taking notes for yourselves as well as in whatever you're sharing. Please take notes for yourself then, and that so that it becomes an invitation to practice, right? Peace, love, contentment. I feel much love and happiness, would like to strengthen gratitude. Yeah. It's like a collecting all the petals of a flower, you know, or I don't know, all the Pokemon of the enjoyable family, because we do need to have all these, as Venerable Ravina Kurtin sometimes says, we do need all these energies in our repertoire, in our collection, to succeed on our spiritual path, on our path of psychological development. And these are all very secular, you know, gratitude, awe, contentment, peace. They're also very deeply religious, because you cannot imagine really any contemplative or spiritual tradition without these terms, without references to love and joy and contentment and peace. Like, that's all pervasive. And at the same time, right, they're completely universal in nature. Yeah. I would like to keep them as much as possible, but stay with the same. Yeah, absolutely. No worries. They're all positive. All enjoyable emotions are also connected to all the other enjoyable emotions. That's this idea of a network once again. We have the network of us being practitioners, and then we have the networks within us. We have the negative network of bad habits or of destructive habits, and then we have the positive network of positive habits. And within those, all the constructive enjoyable emotions are connected to all the other constructive enjoyable emotions. So us working on, for example, strengthening gratitude would strengthen everything else. Us working to strengthen peace would strengthen everything else, even though there's also benefits in working on the underexplored ones intentionally. If we're noticing that there's not much awe in our life, there's benefits in working specifically with awe, but that would bring us back to all the other ones. Absolutely. So let's just look at some, as we're approaching the end, important skills for working with enjoyable emotions. And these are, once again, Cosmo's 10 tips for having a good party or something like that. Not an exhaustive list, but something to consider, some points to consider. So first of all, on this topic of just simply bringing it all down to one thing, and we could say, oh, it all boils down to being mindful, right? Being mindfully present with whatever it is that we're doing, or being mindful of our values. Or we could also say it all comes down to kindfulness or heartfulness. Heartfulness is the term that Ram Dass's practice community is now using increasingly. I think it's a wonderful term to describe it all. Sort of the fusion of mindful awareness and what I like to call tenderness, or tsewa in Tibetan. So the fusion of just the basic form of kindness and mindful awareness is the essence of it all. We could say, yeah, it would be enough in itself, but let's unpack that. And yet on this issue of mindful awareness, a quote from Mirko Knaster's biography of Anagarika Munindra, who was the teacher of such well-known in this day and age Western meditation teachers as Sharon Salzberg and Joseph Goldstein and some others. But within the Asian lineage, he was the first mentor or one of the main mentors of Deepa Ma, this credible Bengali practitioner, yogini that I often refer to as a great source of inspiration in my own practice. So in that book, Mirko Knaster writes, when someone once asked Munindra why he practiced meditation, his students expected an exalted response. Instead, he replied, I practice meditation to notice the small purple flowers growing by the roadside, which I otherwise might miss. So that's a very important idea of being present with small things, being present with slower things, being present with our experiences to extract greater levels of joy out of them. And that extraction process is not going to harm the things that we're attending to. We're just going to see them truly for the first time, as opposed to just throwing a cursory glance and then forgetting. So one idea here is simply paying attention and then adding an element of appreciation. So it says here in the slide, being with the experiences by applying close attention allows us to have more pleasant experiences. For example, by noticing the things that we would otherwise miss. This can also be described by using the English word linger, to linger on something, to linger with something. So what does it mean? Quite literally what Munindra just said about the purple flowers. Let's say we're sitting in a coffee house. Let's pay attention to our surroundings, or to the taste of that coffee, or to the people around us. We're joining this class. Let's pay attention to the fact that there's at least 20 of us right now here, 20 people cultivating heartfulness. Beyond that, hundreds more. Beyond that, this is not the only time that we're meeting, right? Hopefully, we'll have many opportunities to keep meeting. So, even attending to this invisible and somewhat abstract idea of being in a network of heartfulness. Wow, powerful. And beyond that, so many things that we could attend to in this moment to experience joy, appreciation, gratitude, awe, fear, many others. They can be extracted from this moment by attending to it in a correct way. And one way to extract these joyful experiences is to notice what's there and then activate this mental function or factor, as Buddhist psychologists would say, of appreciation. Appreciation is a mental function that allows us to see the value of an object. For that reason, it's sometimes translated somewhat misleadingly, but also appropriate within that context as devotion. What is it? It's a mental function that allows us to appreciate the beautiful qualities of, let's say, our teachers, or our lineage, or the Buddha, and so forth. But the same mental function is applicable to a flower, to a cup of coffee, to the fact of us simply being together and knowing that within the back of our mind that it's never going to be the same again. This is a unique moment to appreciate. We're never going to be in the same situation ever again. And yet there's so much transitory beauty in it. So applying that factor of appreciation consciously can be done to experience wonderful energy waves of gratitude rushing through us. And that's actually at the heart of so many gratitude meditations. We will be making some. It's actually easy to do them, but some people love to have a recording, so why not? So yes, that's one thing to explore. So noticing things and then applying appreciation and gratitude to them. That's already a huge thing to do. Another very simple idea is slowing down. So let's say there are two major things that we can do to collect experiences. We need them both in a way, and we need to find the balance between them. So one approach is to collect experiences fast and as many as possible. So let's say we wake up in the morning and then we start planning. Okay, I'm going to experience the joy of having this delicious breakfast, and I'm going to go there, I'm going to go shopping, I'm going to do this, I'm going to talk to my friend, I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to go to a concert, and then I'm going to have a glass of wine, blah, 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 blah. So we're listing things that we think will bring us pleasure, and they might. Nothing wrong with that. And we're trying to make it richly packed, right? oh, well, we're in a new city and we're like, I'm going to go to all the places. Because I'm here. I'm just here for 3 days. Why not go to all the places? So that's valid. But the flip side of that, or the other approach, is to say, I'm just going to really find contentment and joy in just a few things to do. So it's in between the two that we discuss the very complex themes of attention economy and the capitalist obsession with efficiency and all those sorts of things, and where we try to find a personal balance in which our emotional body would not be overwhelmed by the amount of experiences that we want to absorb. So Tsogno Rinpoche talks about this avoiding overwhelm in his latest book with Dan Goleman, Why We Meditate. But just in general, here it's about finding the right pace. And sometimes it means that we consciously train in slowing down. Sometimes it actually means we consciously train in speeding up. If we're the person who's so slow, we never get anything done. But sometimes it means slowing down. And for example, indeed, sitting in that, cafe on a square, if we ended up, let's say we're visiting Italy, right? We're just sitting there somewhere and we're just sitting and observing and absorbing, exploring things slowly. If we feel certain resistance to it, oh no, I want to go fast, I need to go fast, I need to be efficient, gotta go, which can be associated with ADHD and things like that, and just be within us because we have been programmed to be efficient, quote unquote, by the capitalist culture, especially in English-speaking countries. This is where we can flip the script consciously and practice contentment and strengthen the experiences of peace, of sensory pleasure. Oh, there's some sun, the wind in the leaves, the voices of other people chatting. There's also empathetic joy and rejoicing possible in that situation as well. Sense of connection. Oh, we're all in this together. We're all in this giant boat called Italy for this specific moment, and so forth. And all of that would eventually all bring us to contentment. So just explore that. In which situation do I need to slow down? In which situations can I slow down? Be like the water and not like Sonic the Hedgehog, running through to collect more golden rings. And then assessing the pull, another idea related to enjoyable emotions on a very different note. So enjoyable emotions are supposed to pull us towards something. They inspire us to do something, including procreation and other things of that nature. And they are also at the root of us being pulled towards consumption of alcohol, consumption of food, smelling flowers, all the types of different sensory experiences. We're pulled to them by the promise of an enjoyable emotion at the end. So then this is where we can just step and sober up for a moment and ask ourselves, well, where is it pulling me? Is that going to be contributing to sustainable well-being? So we simply ask ourselves questions about, how is it going to affect my health? How is it going to affect my relationships? How is it going to affect my social standing? How is it going to affect my mental well-being? Because I do want to have certain hedonic pleasures. That's healthy. And at the same time, I don't want to become fully reliant for mental regulation on just the specific outer types of stimulation, right? There's simply the quest of finding balance. So it's nice to be sometimes appreciated for our looks or for our wit or for our achievements. But it would become dangerous were I to completely move the focal point of my self-worth towards the opinions of others, right? So it's an intricate dance. And in the dance, we just sometimes have to ask ourselves, well, where is it pulling me? This is also the principle that would allow us to deal with Schadenfreude skillfully, because we would ask ourselves, is it wholesome? Is it good that I'm now rejoicing in this specific person's failure? And even if we can justify it from the point of view of like, yes, that's actually a horrible person, yada, yada, yada. It's like, well, the actual question is, what is it doing to my mind? And in dwelling on this moment of Schadenfreude, am I contributing to the degeneration of some of the positive qualities in my mind? Because Schadenfreude can weaken my compassion, weaken my empathy, weaken my empathetic joy, and so forth. So there's always justification for everything, but just asking ourselves, is this good? Is this wholesome? is a very valid thing to do. And there's nothing, bad about just asking that question very gently with ourselves. It's more of a personal practice that we do. There's very few relationships actually in which we can be asking each other that. It takes a lot of trust. And so therapists can sometimes ask that, spiritual mentors can ask that sometimes, partners on some occasions, not often, not always. And if we're just talking to friends and so forth, we try to be very gentle instead of trying to psychoanalyze each other and give advice, and tell other people how to feel and so forth. But for ourselves, that's where it's the safest. And that's where we can ask, hey, is this a good idea? Is this a good thing to experience? And then harvesting joy, that's the final note, which many people would know, is a practice for noticing and strengthening the different types of sensory enjoyment by carefully attending to our 5 sensory fields. It's a large part, or it's an important part of the CEB curriculum. Basically, it's a practice in which we go into, for example, our visual domain, and we find something pleasant there right now. We go into the auditory domain, and we harvest some joyful experiences there. What are some pleasant sounds that I'm hearing right now? It can also be pleasure in just hearing silence. And olfactory, tastes, and tactilely. Is there anything pleasant in my body right now? But when we play with it consistently, as we actually do that meditation regularly, it becomes a powerful source of joy. And that then supports other types of joy-related practices, joy-related meditations. That's actually a wonderful way of establishing contentment through attending to our most simple hedonic pleasures. Oh, just the fact that, oh, there's a beautiful shade of green right now in front of me. And there's some pleasant sounds of rain somewhere outside. And this texture of my trousers, it feels nice as well. So very simple things, but they lead to contentment. And that teaches us to be present with joy in each individual moment. And this is, of course, also, and I wish we had more time. Oh, fine, one more slide, sorry. This is also a space in which we can actually focus on cultivating pretty much every of the emotions that we've listed, and some of them can become traits also. There's 2 specific positive traits related to joy. Moods I've mentioned. One of them is a state of flow, which would be familiar to many people when you're so engaged in an artistic activity or professional undertaking, or just swimming, for example. And the other one is just having an elevated mood where it's like the world is smiling at us. That's a mood. But with traits, we can develop the trait of being a truly grateful person, a person truly capable of experiencing awe at the beauty of reality, and so forth. So many actually of these emotions can become traits eventually, I think. And this is where we can undertake that training. Empathetic joy and rejoicing, 2 very important practices taught in Buddhism. There's wonderful power in them. They're incredibly powerful. Empathetic joy is one of the strongest practices for cultivating single-pointed concentration, actually, as well. And also, in Buddhism, it's said empathetic joy practice is a karmic cause for abundance and prosperity. So if that's on our mind, like, we can also explore that. And gratitude, so powerful, even used for emotional resilience in hospitals these days to prevent burnout in nurses and doctors and so forth. Some hospitals in California in particular have tried that, to add that just to the mix. Or there's a growing volume of information about the importance of awe, the beauty of awe, the power of awe. And there's many, many others. And on the most advanced levels, we can even cultivate bliss so that it constantly pervades our experience. We can cultivate peace, that it's always there with us. Contentment. These are more profound states, more stable states. But that is all accessible to us. So one thing to explore is to think about all of those sorts of things. And I think one thing to always easily connect, one tool for connecting to others, that's going to be the final note. And that's something we've done today actually together. And I hope we will continue doing in the future, especially when we do run the long course on strengthening these qualities of joy, hopefully very, very soon. One thing that we can always use as a communication tool is asking others and trying to see in others what brings them joy. What brings them joy, and what types of joy are they experiencing in their life right now? What enjoyable emotions are strongly present in their life? It's a good conversation starter. It doesn't need to be that fancy. We don't need to word it in this fanciful way. It can simply be like, oh, what are some of the pleasant experiences that we're actually engaged in conversation, right? What are some of the most pleasant things that you've experienced lately. What was the latest joyful experience that you've had? What brings you joy? What are you excited about? What are you passionate about? What are you proud of in your work, in your life, in your family situation, and so forth? What are you proud in your children's achievements? And we're talking to people who do have nahis. So just exploring all those things and learning to see the world through the lens of joy can be very powerful for our well-being in general. It doesn't mean we don't need the other lenses. We will also need the lens of compassion, the lens of loving kindness, and so forth. But it's the lens of joy that we actually often skip, at least unintentionally, in this transitory stage when these contemplative practices are still trying to pervade the global West, quote unquote. And we're still trying to find our way through all of this. But it's my personal hope and aspiration and sort of the dedication for the session that we will all be able to strengthen these types of enjoyable emotions and then traits and share them with the rest of the world. And it's certainly been a joy to spend these 2 hours together with all of you. So I hope that we can all keep exploring that together as a network. So wishing you lots of joy in the rest of your day. Not going to take any more of your time, but just bowing deeply to all of you and hoping to see you all very soon. Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you for joining.